She timed it perfectly, right after appetizers, when the wine had softened everyone's edges and the waiter had just walked away. The envelope hit the table like a slap, manila and thick. Her nails tapped it twice, sharp and deliberate. "Be a man and sign it," Melissa said, just loud enough to ensure the couples at the adjacent table would hear. "My ex was twice the man you'll ever be." That one stung, and she wanted it to. The words hung in the air like a foul stench, followed by the sound of someone at her end of the table trying, and failing, to hold back a snort. Her friend Carla, a walking Botox ad with a wine glass surgically attached to her hand, leaned in and whispered something behind her palm. More stifled laughter. Even Melissa's brother, Grant, smirked. Daniel didn't move for a second. He just sat there, blinking once, like his brain was processing a glitch. Then he reached for the envelope, peeled back the flap slowly, and pulled out the paperwork. No theatrics. No eye roll. Just clinical precision. She had chosen this place on purpose. Quaint, expensive, intimate. A spot they'd gone to on anniversaries. A spot where they were known. And now, she wanted the waitstaff and the regulars to witness what a real man looked like when discarded. What she didn't realize was that Daniel had stopped reacting a long time ago. Somewhere between the second year of therapy she never attended and the third company dinner she bailed on because Grant needed help with his startup, Daniel had gone from sad to silent. That silence wasn't defeat. It was something far worse, calculation. He scanned the agreement like he was proofreading someone else's obituary, then reached for the pen. Her pen, a garish gold Mont Blanc she used more for status than function, and signed. One stroke, then another, then a final flourish like he was approving a shipment of dry goods instead of ending a 32-year marriage. He closed the folder, slid it back to her side of the table, and looked her dead in the eyes. "Thanks for dinner," he said quietly. "Bill's on me. Consider it a farewell gift." Melissa blinked. That wasn't the reaction she'd expected. No groveling, no pleading, not even a why. "You're seriously just walking away?" she asked, her voice somewhere between mockery and disbelief. Daniel pushed his chair back. "You already decided I'm not worth keeping. Why waste both our time?" He turned, adjusted the collar of his navy wool coat, and walked out, ignoring the stunned silence and barely concealed grins at the other tables. He didn't even glance at the waiter, who stood frozen near the kitchen, unsure whether to bring out the entrees or call someone. Outside, the night was crisp. Wind bit his cheeks, and for the first time in years, he felt something other than numb. Not freedom, not sadness, something colder, sharper, resolve. Melissa would laugh about this on the ride home. She'd post something catty online, probably a filtered picture of the envelope and a caption like, "Free at last." That was fine. Let her. Because here's the thing. Melissa never asked Daniel what he actually did for work. Not really. Not once in 32 years. He was just in logistics, which she translated to trucks and boxes, and filed away as boring. She never asked why he had 2 phones, or why his home office had a biometric lock, or why he always took calls in the garage. Better reception, he told her once with a grin. That night, while she and Carla giggled over cocktails and uploaded boomerangs of the paper stack with cheesy "Cheers to Freedom" captions, Daniel walked into his office, placed his phone face down, and sat. No lights, just the pale blue glow of his monitor. He opened an encrypted folder labeled Asset Separation Contingency and clicked through the tabs. Each one, neat and color-coded, mapped out a different layer. Shell companies, blind trusts, investment arms with just enough opacity to keep nosy attorneys guessing for months. His thumb hovered over a button labeled Activate. Not yet. Timing was everything. Next, he launched a virtual desktop and logged into a secure server. A custom-built, behind-the-scenes boardroom portal for a sponsorship group Melissa had once raved about landing. She never once wondered who her mysterious angel investors were. Never cared. The money was good, the praise from her friends was better, and the founder, someone discreet, old money, apparently, never attended board meetings. Of course he didn't. He was sitting at home, watching, listening, taking notes. Melissa had compared him to her ex like that was some kind of threat. The ex who'd peaked at 35, who still wore leather jackets unironically, who once tried to start a tequila brand and ended up in debt to his cousin. The ex who called her babe and bought her a necklace he couldn't afford. That guy? Twice the man Daniel was. Daniel almost laughed. He reached for a small brass token on his desk, an old poker chip with a faded K etched into one side. Most would dismiss it as a cheap souvenir. Melissa certainly had. But that chip represented something different. Something he'd earned, in a place she didn't even know existed. If you're still listening at this point, do me a favor, subscribe. Over 90% of the people who hear stories like this never do. But every single one who does helps fuel the team that brings these quiet wars and cold victories to light. And trust me, you'll want to see where this one goes. Because Melissa thought she won when he signed those papers. She had no idea the man she dismissed like a butler was about to become the architect of her collapse. Melissa was already halfway through her second espresso martini when she posted the photo. Caption: free at last. Cheers to clean slates. The photo showed only her manicured hand holding the signed divorce papers against the backdrop of a half-eaten creme brulee. The likes rolled in almost immediately. Carla commented, "He folded faster than my ex's startup." Someone else posted, "You glow different when you drop dead weight." They toasted to her easy win, giggling over memories of Daniel's low-energy birthday speeches and how he used to ask for the check like a middle manager with coupons. No one questioned the timing. No one asked why she was so eager to erase a man who'd quietly paid for every house, vacation, and failed yoga studio they'd ever touched. It didn't matter. The narrative was set. She was the phoenix, he was the ashes. Meanwhile, Daniel wasn't sipping anything. He was seated at his desk under cold LED light, eyes flicking across a screen filled with cascading green code. Not decorative, not Matrix-style fluff. Actual infrastructure, financial and digital. He typed a password no one but him knew, waited for retinal verification, and watched the encrypted folder unfold like a steel flower. Inside, layers of preparation that stretched back years. A draft labeled Asset Separation Contingency V6, timestamped 3 months after Melissa's accidental weekend trip with her ex in Napa. She thought she'd covered it. Claimed it was a girl's thing when he spotted the odd Airbnb receipt. Daniel had simply nodded. Then built a spreadsheet that started with insurance policies and ended with voting rights on private equity boards. He opened a dashboard titled Foundry Group, Private Boardroom Portal. 1 click later, he was inside. 3 years ago, Melissa's startup had nearly gone under. The savior? A mysterious investment collective that agreed to back her firm during a downturn. She never asked who they were. Never cared that the signature came from Graybridge Holdings. She assumed it was old money. European maybe. Some retired oligarch with a yacht and no oversight. The truth? Daniel had designed Graybridge from scratch. Not to control her, but to prepare for the moment she stopped pretending to respect him. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was insurance. The portal showed real-time voting power. Foundry Group owned 38% of Melissa's company, through layers of shells. He had enough leverage to start internal audits, pause disbursements, and even trigger compensation reviews. Everything legal. Everything documented. Daniel tapped the Prepare Audit button but didn't confirm. Not yet. He needed one more signal. So he clicked on a different folder. A quieter one. Blind Watch, Weekly Polls. Inside were screenshots. Time-stamped. GPS labeled. Polls from public surveillance footage tied to Melissa's favorite haunts. Wine bars, retreats, her Pilates studio. All aggregated through public APIs and public-facing camera loops. Perfectly legal. The files were unremarkable at first, until you looked closely. At a glance, Melissa laughing. Melissa texting. Melissa touching someone else's wrist across a wine-stained table. Melissa whispering to someone in a car with tinted windows, late at night, behind that Vietnamese fusion place she swore Daniel wouldn't like. Daniel zoomed in on a still, her hand on the man's knee. Clear as day. He saved it. For now. Across town, Melissa was holding court, laughing too loud. Rewriting history in real time, telling her friends, "I gave him everything. He didn't fight for me because he never wanted to." She even added, "My ex knew how to show up. Daniel just existed." She didn't know what she'd just activated. Because Daniel wasn't reacting anymore. He was documenting, strategizing, pulling one silent string at a time. It wouldn't be tonight. Not tomorrow. But the whispers were already starting. She just didn't know it yet. And the first one wouldn't come from Daniel. It would come from the exact place she felt safest, her work. A single email, sent not by him, but by a compliance officer on payroll, requesting a routine review of department expenditures. Melissa's name would be near the top. And Daniel? He'd be on mute, smiling. Because the most dangerous man in any room isn't the loud one. It's the one who's already 5 moves ahead. 3 years ago, Melissa had strutted into their kitchen waving a bottle of champagne and crowing. They said yes. She was glowing. Not the usual glow she reserved for spa days and Botox top-ups, but the kind that made her feel like someone finally recognized her genius. Her startup, an influencer analytics platform with zero profit and more buzzwords than actual code, had just secured a multi-million-dollar investment from a strategic partner. Anonymous, but ultra-high net worth. Back then, she didn't bother asking who. She was too busy planning the company retreat in Tulum and ordering custom-branded mugs. Daniel remembered it clearly because she popped that bottle over their granite island and toasted with Carla on speakerphone. To finally being free from begging tech bros for scraps, she laughed, while Daniel sat quietly across from her with his laptop open. She didn't notice the way he tilted the screen away or the faint blue glow of a shell company diagram pulsing like a heartbeat. Graybridge Holdings, officially registered in Luxembourg, was the silent angel behind the funding round. It was real money, Daniel's. Diversified, laundered through 4 different asset vehicles, and deployed with surgical precision. Not because he believed in her app. He didn't. The platform was a mess of paid plugins and unpaid interns. But Melissa? She believed in it. And that belief would be her leash. Back in his home office, present day, Daniel sat with a glass of water, not whiskey, not scotch, just plain water. His hand hovered over the boardroom dashboard like a surgeon about to cut. The irony? Melissa still listed her title on LinkedIn as co-founder, chief strategy officer. Strategy, a word she used to mask chaos. The Foundry Group's voting portal loaded slowly. He watched each tab populate, shareholder breakdown, executive review rights, audit levers. Then, the page he needed, Department Oversight Authority. As majority shareholder, via a silent network of shell entities, he had the legal right to initiate internal reviews of department performance. Not termination, just review. A trigger, a stone tossed into the pond. He opened the HR ledger and ran a simple query. Names of all department heads flagged for conflict of interest, unexplained variance in expense reports, and non-compliance with internal communication policy. The kind of bureaucratic phrases no one notices until they're used. Melissa's name appeared. Chief Strategy Officer, flagged for internal collaboration pattern inconsistency. In other words, her Slack messages didn't match her calendar logs. Her lunch breaks were missing vendor contacts. Her expense card showed 2 charges at the same resort her ex-boyfriend happened to post from 6 months ago, right around the time she canceled their anniversary trip, claiming Q2 numbers were in freefall. Daniel flagged her. No note. No explanation. Just a red check mark next to her name and a timestamp. The software generated a review ticket and assigned it to the Internal Ethics Committee. The chair of that committee? A former compliance officer Daniel had recruited personally, back when Melissa thought he was just a logistics guy who gets lucky on dividend stocks. She still didn't know who signed her checks, or who her CEO really answered to. That same evening, across town, Melissa was hosting a wine night for her girl tribe, a curated mix of founders, influencers, and 2 mid-level brand reps who followed her because they thought she was married to money, which, technically, was still true. For now, she was venting about being done with emotionally stunted men. Carla, predictably, was nodding and sipping. You're the visionary, babe. Always have been. He was just filler. Melissa waved her hand. He's not even a footnote. Meanwhile, Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching the back-end logs update in real time. The system was already drafting an auto email to the ethics committee requesting timestamps, chat transcripts, and expense logs. All automated. All hands off. Nothing illegal. Nothing vengeful. Just precise. And to her company? It would look like protocol. Daniel opened a second screen. This one showing the full investment structure. Every branch of Graybridge, every subsidiary, every equity slice that formed the quiet noose around Melissa's startup. He clicked through the tree until he landed on one obscure node. Kingdom Ridge Ventures, Series C silent partner. That company owned the trademarks for her brand slogan. The one she had printed on every tote bag, hoodie, and neon office wall. He smirked. Not yet. That card would stay tucked up his sleeve for now. Because this wasn't just a marriage ending. It was a case study. And Melissa was about to learn, very publicly, what happens when you ignore the quiet man in the corner who was always 10 times smarter than you assumed. Melissa parked her Tesla a little crooked that morning, too busy reapplying lip gloss in the rearview mirror to notice she'd straddled the line. She wasn't late. Never was. But she liked making an entrance. The kind of entrance that said, I'm not just important, I'm essential. That day was no different. Cream blazer, stilettos, sunglasses large enough to hide last night's wine, but sharp enough to slice through interns' self-esteem. She breezed past the front desk like she owned the building, because in her mind, she did. Or at least she was close. Founders like her didn't answer to anyone. At least, that's what she told everyone who'd listen at the wine bar. So when her keycard buzzed red against the elevator panel, she actually laughed. Cute, she muttered, scanning it again. Still red. The front desk girl, Sophie, young, eager, scared of confrontation, offered a weak smile. Hi Melissa. IT said there was a temporary access thing. I'm sure it's nothing, just a software patch. Melissa's smile cracked an inch. Patch? For me? Has HR been sniffing glue again? But she kept it light, smirking, tossing her curls and heading for the stairs. Just a glitch. Everything could be explained. She even texted Carla mid-stride. Either our IT guy finally grew a spine, or someone's playing audit cosplay. When she reached her floor, the energy felt off. Quieter. The kind of quiet that follows bad news down a hallway like a draft. Her assistant gave a polite wave, but avoided eye contact. A junior dev visibly closed a Slack window when she walked past. Melissa's stomach flipped, not from fear, but insult. How dare they? Then she saw the email. Subject: Department Review Notice, Strategy and Partnerships. She froze. She clicked it 3 times, like repetition would change the wording. You have been temporarily reassigned to remote status during the course of the internal ethics review. A compliance folder will be provided. Please submit any documentation relevant to strategic decisions made in Q3 and Q4 of the previous fiscal year. No greeting. No explanation. No respect. She barged into her boss's office without knocking. Greg was mid-call. He flinched when he saw her, quickly muting. Melissa, I was going to. What the hell is this? She hissed, holding up her phone like it was evidence of a war crime. He didn't answer right away, just motioned for her to sit. She didn't. I need your badge, he said instead. Soft. Apologetic. Gutless. She stared at him. You can't be serious. This is a joke, right? An IT glitch. Maybe someone's trying to make a point, but forgot I'm the reason this company still has a pulse. Greg sighed and tapped a folder on his desk. Her name was on the tab. Typed. Not handwritten. That meant this wasn't new. This wasn't spontaneous. This came from above, he said quietly. Legal is running the audit. I'm just following through. She blinked. Above? Who the hell is above me? He looked at her for a long second, then glanced away. Coward. She stormed back to her office, or what used to be her office. Her badge didn't open that door either. It buzzed red, just like downstairs. Someone inside looked up, startled, then quickly minimized their screen. They replaced her already? She whipped out her phone and typed furiously. Enjoying your freedom, loser? Your silence is boring. Say something. She hit send and stared at the screen. No reply. She didn't know it yet, but the audit folder she was so desperate to dismiss, it had already been assembled. Not by legal. Not by some faceless compliance drone. By Daniel. It was a digital kill shot, disguised as a polite review request. Inside were Slack logs, expense inconsistencies, timestamped badge swipes that didn't align with calendar entries, and, tucked deep at the bottom, a photo, blurred but clear enough. Her ex, her hand on his arm outside a vendor summit she claimed had gone late. All delivered through proper channels. No fingerprints. Greg didn't even know Daniel had flagged the request, because Daniel never used his name in the system. Just an access key tied to one of the shell companies that, on paper, was the single largest stakeholder in Melissa's company. While she stood fuming in a hallway she no longer had access to, Daniel sat at home, reviewing batch logs and response times. She wanted noise, drama, a confrontation. But Daniel didn't fight in public. He fought in silence, in structure, in layers so deep she wouldn't even know she'd lost until someone else tried to explain it to her. And that was the point. Melissa thought she'd humiliated him at a dinner table. But humiliation is fast. Momentary. Collapse? That takes time. Planning. And patience. Daniel had all 3. Melissa was pacing her condo barefoot in silk pajamas she couldn't afford before the funding round. The mug in her hand was cold. She'd reheated it twice, but hadn't taken a sip. The badge denial. The HR lockdown. The vague, pitiful looks from people who used to fawn over her vision. Something was happening. She just hadn't connected the dots yet. Not because she couldn't, but because deep down, she didn't want to. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She had made the moves, gotten ahead of it, rebranded herself as strategic and intuitive. Daniel was supposed to be irrelevant by now, just a line item in a divorce filing and maybe, if he was lucky, the occasional punchline over wine with the girls. Instead, her inbox was an ice bath. Subject line, private. No sender. No footer. Just a black text bubble. She clicked. One screenshot. It was a Slack chat between her and Carla. From 6 months ago. Carla. Still pretending you respect him? Melissa, please. His big logistics empire? It's trucks and boxes. And don't get me started on the sex. It's like filing taxes. Quiet, sad, and once a year. She forgot she ever typed that. Thought she was being funny at the time. She stared at it now like it was a crime scene photo. Below the chat was a message. He didn't have to read this. But he did. She froze. Her thumb hovered over the trackpad. Another attachment. Zip file. She knew better. She should know better. But she clicked anyway. Inside were 5 photos. Blurry at first, but clearly enhanced. Her. At that resort in Sedona. Her ex, Jared, across from her. Same brown leather bracelet. Same stupid jawline. They weren't doing anything illegal. Not kissing. Not touching. But in every shot, her face betrayed her. The lean across the table. The head tilt. The look of someone still emotionally invested. The timestamps? Aligned perfectly with a client retreat she had faked on her Outlook calendar. Daniel's name had even been CC'd in the itinerary. She remembered because she'd added it herself. Thought it was smart. The final photo was different. Just her, standing on a hotel balcony. Alone. A wine glass in one hand. Her phone in the other. She was smiling. She'd captioned that moment on Instagram. Freedom never felt so luxurious. Now it felt like evidence. She slammed her laptop shut. Her hands were trembling. Not from guilt. Guilt would have been easier. No, this was fear. Cold, ancient, reptilian fear. The kind you feel when you realize the door you thought was locked has been open the whole time. She texted Carla immediately. Delete our messages. All of them. Carla replied 3 minutes later. What are you talking about? Melissa didn't answer. She stood up too fast and nearly tripped over the charging cord. She unplugged the router. Like that would help. She turned her phone off. Then turned it back on. Checked the settings. Airplane mode on, then off. Then she stared at her webcam. Paranoia? Maybe. But the message didn't just come out of nowhere. It knew what to show. Not everything. Just enough. Just enough to tell her someone had been watching. Listening. Waiting. Daniel hadn't replied to her text the day before. She thought that was weakness. Now she understood it was calculation. The most terrifying message she'd ever received didn't even say his name. And it didn't need to. Because only one person in the world would know to include the bracelet Jared always wore. Or the angle of the photo from their old condo balcony. The one only Daniel had access to when they lived together. She sat on the couch, phone in one hand, forehead in the other. Her world had turned in 48 hours. The emails. The access denial. The ethics review. And now this. It wasn't a leak. It wasn't coincidence. It was him. Not reacting. Not ranting. Just pulling threads. And one by one, everything she'd stitched together was coming undone. By noon the next day, Melissa had received her third, let's circle back next quarter email. At first, she didn't see the pattern, just assumed it was standard Q4 jitters, maybe a little market noise. But by 2 p.m., her inbox looked like a funeral guest book. One client canceled their ad renewal outright. Another postponed a scheduled influencer rollout indefinitely. And then came the note from a major skincare brand they'd been courting for months. We weren't aware that the founder's ex-spouse sits on the board. We'll be reevaluating our partnership structure moving forward. The words felt innocuous on paper. But Melissa wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what this was. Retaliation. Controlled. Calculated. And perfectly timed. She threw her phone across the room, and it ricocheted off the couch into a ceramic planter, cracking it clean in half. Soil spilled onto the hardwood. She didn't move. Just stared at the screen. An hour later, another email landed. This one from a high-end fitness apparel brand. The kind that paid handsomely for brand placement with micro-influencers. Subject line, change in strategic alignment. Inside, a short paragraph stating they were halting campaign negotiations due to unexpected concerns raised during a standard vetting process. Translation, they found something, or someone showed them. She stormed into the office the next morning, keycard reactivated, but access still restricted to public areas. Her old office had been repurposed into a collaborative workspace. Her assistant was now reporting to the operations lead. Nobody made eye contact. A junior dev actually flinched when she passed. The whispers were louder now. Not words. Just that weird energy that settles when people know something you don't. She could feel it clinging to her like static. She didn't knock this time when she entered Greg's office. She slammed the door behind her and didn't bother to sit. This is retaliation, she hissed. Daniel is behind this. The client withdrawals. The messages. That audit. Greg looked like he hadn't slept. He rubbed his temples and stared at the stack of folders on his desk like they'd grown teeth. Melissa, he began, but she cut him off. No, don't Melissa me. This is corporate harassment. He's trying to destroy me. Greg's fingers laced together. He nodded slowly, then gestured to the chair across from him. I think you need to sit down. She folded her arms. I'm not here to play therapist. Fix it. Melissa, this time firmer. Sit down. Something in his voice, something unfamiliar, cut through her indignation. She lowered herself slowly, watching him like a hawk. He leaned forward and spoke quietly, like he didn't want the walls to hear. There's something you need to know about Daniel. She opened her mouth to scoff, but the look on his face stopped her. He wasn't patronizing her. He looked spooked. You remember 3 years ago, he said, when we got that injection of funding during the downturn? The anonymous group that kept us afloat. Melissa's heart sank. What does that have to do with? They weren't anonymous. Not really. We just didn't ask enough questions. He slid a thin folder across the desk. She opened it. Inside were 2 sheets, one showing a shareholder breakdown, the other a nested structure of corporate ownership. There it was. Graybridge Holdings. And under that, Kingdom Ridge Ventures. The same name tied to their trademark IP. Greg continued. He didn't just invest. He structured it. He's not just some silent shareholder. He's the founder of the investment vehicle that owns nearly 40% of this company. Melissa's throat tightened. No, that's not possible. He was a logistics guy. He did shipping invoices, and he founded a private infrastructure network, managed supply chain logistics across 3 continents, built silent capital groups around commodity movements. He kept everything off radar by design. Greg took a breath. He has final review authority on executive leadership compensation, including yours. He can't fire you, but he can strangle your division without touching policy. Melissa's mouth went dry. He was always polite, Greg added quietly. But he knew everything. He read everything. Meeting minutes, vendor logs, calendar discrepancies. We thought he was bored. Turns out he was building a sword. She slumped back in her chair. He said nothing. Exactly, Greg said. He didn't have to. And that was the first moment, truly, the first, when Melissa felt something that wasn't rage or pride or indignation. It was fear. Because now, it wasn't about a marriage. It wasn't about a man scorned or a woman humiliated. This was about infrastructure, control, silence so strategic it weaponized time itself. And she'd spent the last 3 years publicly mocking the man who could pull her company apart with a signature. She hadn't been fighting an ex. She'd been provoking a ghost. The walls were closing in, but Melissa didn't know it yet. Not fully, not viscerally, not the way a person understands fire only once they've been burned. She was still clinging to this idea that Daniel had pulled some strings, maybe found a few friends in legal, maybe pulled favors with an old contact from his trucking days. She even entertained the fantasy that it was illegal, what he was doing, that it could all be undone with the right threat, the right tantrum. She was wrong. It was early evening when Greg called her back in. He looked worse now. The kind of worse that came from realizing you've been living next to a volcano thinking it was a hill. Melissa, he said, voice low, barely a notch above a whisper. I just got off the phone with parent company legal. She waited, arms folded, lip gloss perfect, still posturing, even if the ground beneath her heels was starting to crack. He took a breath. Do you know who your husband really is? Her mouth opened, then closed. He pushed a document across the desk. Not flashy, not branded, just a printout from the parent company's internal compliance database. On it, a list of major shareholders, oversight authorities, and governance roles for all entities under the umbrella of the investment consortium that saved them 3 years ago. Daniel's name didn't appear directly. That was the first thing she noticed. No signature, no title, but in the field marked founder, primary asset controller for Graybridge Holdings Limited, there it was. A reference ID, one she'd seen before, on the paperwork for their prenup. The number tied to Daniel's Cayman Trust. Greg tapped the paper. That shell company you keep calling the group? It's not a group. It's him. He built it. No, Melissa said, shaking her head. That's not. Daniel doesn't do finance. He negotiated shipping contracts. He bought boxes. Melissa, Greg said, more gently now. He designed the platform you use to onboard international logistics partners. He funded the developers who built your payment system. He's been in this world longer than you've known him. She gripped the edge of the chair. Why would he hide that? Greg didn't blink. Because power doesn't need to announce itself. He turned to his screen and clicked open an org chart. At the top, Graybridge Holdings LLC. Beneath it, a staggered set of controlled entities. One was Kingdom Ridge Ventures, the silent Series C investor who owned 38% of Melissa's company. That same group also held controlling shares in the licensing firm that owned the slogan on all of her merchandise, the design rights for her product's user interface, and, perhaps most painfully, the influencer licensing database her entire revenue stream depended on. And next to each of those lines was a quiet tag. Compensation Committee Voting Rights. Yes. Melissa's name was highlighted in red. Daniel, Greg said quietly, has final say on executive reviews, including yours. She stared at the screen like it was a foreign language. All those pause campaigns, he continued. All those partner reviews suddenly happening out of nowhere. He didn't just nudge them. He orchestrated them. He made them think twice, because he controls the strategic partner data they rely on to predict virality. Melissa stood up slowly, then sat back down. Her voice cracked. I thought he was just done. He signed the papers. Greg met her eyes. He didn't leave Melissa. He stepped back. It hit her then. Not as a scream, not as panic, but as a total collapse of narrative. She hadn't walked away from a weak man. She'd kicked a loaded weapon and laughed when it didn't fire. She remembered the pen stroke, how effortlessly he'd signed the divorce papers, not even blinking. She thought he was broken. Turns out, he was waiting. There was no one to call. No damage control to run. Because the damage had already happened. Quietly, strategically, irreversibly, and somewhere, in a locked office or maybe a corner of his clean, boring kitchen, Daniel was probably sipping coffee, reading the news, watching metrics update in real time. Not out of vengeance, out of principle. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. No music, no small talk. Just the hum of vertical motion and the thud of Melissa's pulse behind her ribs. The message had come at 9:17 a.m., short and cold. Mandatory attendance required. Board review. 10 o'clock sharp. No explanation. No agenda. No subject line. Her stomach turned, but she dressed like armor. Monochrome navy pantsuit. Heels sharp enough to draw blood. Hair pinned back like a news anchor's. But the closer she got to that conference room, the more that outfit felt like a costume. Something meant to project stability while the world beneath her heels disintegrated. The glass doors slid open to reveal a room full of ghosts. The boardroom was full. Everyone in their chairs, folders open, bottled water untouched. At the head of the table sat a man in a charcoal suit, silver hair neat, hands folded. Daniel. She stopped in the doorway. Not one person looked at her with welcome. There was no good morning, no awkward smile, no soft attempt at kindness. Just silence. The kind that suffocates. Daniel didn't look at her. Instead, he calmly flipped to the next slide in the deck in front of him. Without raising his head, he said, "Shall we begin?" Melissa's mouth opened, words pushing against the dam of her throat. Daniel turned the page again. She cleared her throat. I think there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't. Daniel's voice was level, not unkind, but absolutely final. Your employment is under review, not your marriage. The room froze. One of the junior VPs actually leaned back in his chair, as if trying to physically distance himself from what was unfolding. Melissa's lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel finally looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't cruel. They were something far worse. Clinical. He reached into a leather folio and pulled out a sealed folder, sliding it across the table toward her. Inside, he said, you'll find a severance proposal, a standard non-disclosure agreement, and a USB drive. She didn't touch it. His voice stayed flat. The footage on the drive includes internal communications flagged by compliance, Slack logs, calendar mismatches, expense reports. Also, he turned the page, external surveillance timestamps correlated with itinerary discrepancies. I never did anything illegal, she whispered, the air barely moving past her lips. Daniel nodded. Which is why this is not legal action. It's professional correction. Quiet, clean, but complete. Melissa looked around the room. No one met her gaze. Not even Greg. She turned back to Daniel. You're doing this to humiliate me. He raised an eyebrow. If I wanted to humiliate you, Melissa, I wouldn't have offered a severance package. A few chairs shifted. One board member glanced sideways, unsure whether to be impressed or terrified. Daniel folded his hands. You've used the company's resources to rebrand yourself as a visionary. You built a cult of personality using proprietary partner data, vendor funds, and unchecked expenses. You made decisions without oversight. You alienated long-standing clients. You compromised this firm's reputation with your personal life. Her throat closed around a rising lump. "So you just waited?" He nodded once. "Yes." And in that moment, she saw it. All the years she dismissed him. The eye rolls. The derision. The jabs in public. The comparisons to Jared. The smug assumption that silence meant weakness. But Daniel hadn't stayed silent because he was weak. He stayed silent because he was architecting. She stared at the folder. Her fingers shook. He stood. "I'll give you the room." Then he turned, walked past her, and exited without another word. No gloating. No vengeance speech. Just a man who had finished what he came to do. And the worst part? The final blow wasn't rage. It was efficiency. The knock at the door came just after sunset. No doorbell, no courier van idling out front. Just one quiet knock, deliberate and slow, like whoever left the package didn't need acknowledgement. Melissa stood in the middle of her kitchen, frozen mid-pour, watching the wine bottle in her hand tremble slightly. She wasn't expecting anything. No food delivery, no Amazon shipment, no friends visiting, especially not after this week's professional obituary. She waited a few seconds, then walked to the door. No one in the hallway. Just a small, matte black box sitting on the welcome mat. No branding, no label. Just her name, written in clean block letters. She brought it inside carefully, like it might explode. The box wasn't taped. It was magnetically sealed. And when she cracked it open, the first thing she saw stopped her breath like a punch to the chest. A printed photograph. Her, seated at the restaurant 3 weeks ago. Chin raised. Pen in hand. Mid-smirk. The exact second she'd signed the divorce papers. The image was too crisp to have come from a phone. It had been captured professionally, framed, sintered, and printed on textured paper like a piece of artwork. She flipped it over. Nothing on the back. Beneath it was a single sheet of white paper. It listed 10 dates. Next to each was a location. Boutique hotels, 2 private conference centers, 1 spa resort in Napa. And beside each, Jared's name. Her ex. Not just mentioned, but connected. Noble Heights, March 2nd, Jared B. Check-in 4:21 p.m. Melissa badge swipe 4:18 p.m. She dropped the page like it burned. At the bottom of the box, folded once and placed with surgical precision, was a small, handwritten note. Daniel's handwriting. It said, "You said he was twice the man I'll ever be. Now he can carry twice the weight." Melissa staggered back. She sat down on the kitchen floor, knees bent, back against the cabinets. Her mind was blank, but her chest hurt like someone had carved her open. The wine bottle rolled across the tile, unspilled. This wasn't just documentation. This was an autopsy. He didn't yell. He didn't insult her. He didn't post revenge rants online or send nasty emails. He documented. He calculated. He waited. And when the moment came, when the smoke had cleared and she was no longer a CEO, no longer the glowing free woman of Instagram, he delivered the final blow. Not to punish, to educate. The photo reminded her of how pleased she'd looked that night. How powerful she felt. How clever she thought she was, publicly dismissing the man who never shouted, never stormed out, never cheated or lied. Just quietly watched her bury herself. The list of dates? That was proof she'd been underestimating him for years. And the note? That was Daniel's version of a mic drop. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just cold. Elegant. Final. And the terrifying part wasn't that he had all this. It was that she never even noticed he was watching. She buried her face in her hands. The walls of her condo, her supposed fresh start, felt like they were leaning in, like they'd been waiting for her collapse. Every curated object around her suddenly looked fake. Shallow. Like stage props in a one-woman play she had just been booted from. She had mocked Daniel in public. Compared him to a man who borrowed money from friends and lost it on NFT scams. She'd told everyone Daniel was boring, obsolete, lifeless. But obsolete men don't sit on boards. And lifeless men don't get companies with severance packages and timestamps. She reached for the note again, rereading it. Now he can carry twice the weight. And in that moment, sitting barefoot on the tile floor of her $6,000 a month apartment, the realization hit her like gravity. Daniel never fought her. Because Daniel never saw her as an equal opponent. He saw her as a project, with an endpoint. And tonight, the final file had been closed. It was 3 weeks later when the last shard of her old reality finally snapped. Melissa had stopped posting, stopped responding. Her once daily carousel of filtered morning lattes, CEO thoughts, in Helvetica over beach photos, and passive-aggressive quotes about knowing your worth had gone dark. Her social media bio still claimed she was a strategic growth advisor, though no one was hiring and her inbox was mostly spam. Her days were a rinse-and-repeat cycle of scrolling news she couldn't focus on and applying for roles that didn't match her experience. Because, stripped of her title, she didn't really have one. Visionary isn't a resume skill. Neither is energy shifter. The silence was loud. Carla had gone ghost. Greg forwarded her one last HR memo about her voluntary separation and then blocked her number. She couldn't even get a reference from her own company, because technically, she was never on payroll. That was one of Daniel's structures too. She had floated above everything, like a brand ambassador with decision-making privileges. She hadn't seen the trap because it had looked like a throne. The day it happened, Melissa was curled on her couch, wearing sweats she hadn't owned before the fallout. No makeup, no lighting ring, just an overcast afternoon and her laptop screen. Then the ping. A message from an old colleague. Shay, one of the few who hadn't publicly distanced herself. It was a forwarded image. Screenshot from LinkedIn. Daniel. On stage. The photo wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to be. He was standing at a sleek black podium, flanked by banners from the Global Strategic Infrastructure Forum. Behind him, a glowing screen displayed a caption in bold white. Daniel C., founder of multiple infrastructure networks. Anonymous no more. Below it, smaller text, keynote speaker, discrete capital, and the quiet evolution. Melissa stared at it, unmoving. He was in a charcoal suit, tailored, but modest. No flash, no flex, just presence. And in the photo, he was mid-sentence, gesturing with one hand, head turned toward the audience. In the foreground, people standing, applauding. One woman had her hand over her heart. Melissa zoomed in. He looked calm, not proud, not smug, just composed. He had waited until after everything was done to step into the light. Not before, not during, after. He had built in silence, destroyed in silence. And now, he was being applauded in the same silence she used to mock. Her hand hovered over the screen. She tapped to enlarge it. The platform tag beneath his name? Discrete Capital, the same shadow firm that funded her startup. The one that slowly strangled her influence without making a sound. She thought back to all the years she spoke over him. Bragged about carrying the brand. Joked that he should thank her for relevance. And now here he was. Unmasked. Respected. Elevated. While she was alone, sitting on second-hand cushions with nothing but time and screenshots. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then slowly, quietly, she pressed down on the image until her phone buzzed with the prompt. Delete photo? She didn't hesitate. She tapped delete. The screen went blank. No anger. No screaming. Just an ache behind the eyes and a feeling in her chest like something had been scooped out and never replaced. Daniel hadn't needed a fight. He hadn't needed revenge. He'd simply stepped back. And when the time came, he didn't roar. He rose.